I was down in the crawl space that afternoon, hunting for a spare heating element for the old dryer. The space was tight and dusty, smelling of damp earth and old wood. I had to use a flashlight, my knees complaining with every shuffle. That's when I saw it, tucked way back behind some crumbling foundation stones, a metal lockbox, dark with tarnish, that I had never laid eyes on in all our years in this house. Upstairs, my husband Walter was in his usual spot, sitting in his armchair. For 3 years now, he's been lost in a thick fog, mostly just staring at the blank television screen. Some days, he doesn't even know me. It breaks my heart all over again, every single day. The box felt heavy and cold when I pulled it out. I wondered where it came from. Then I remembered Walter's keyring, the one hanging by the back door that he hasn't touched since the fog settled in. There was a key on it labelled "Shed" in his careful, faded handwriting. I fetched it, my hands a bit shaky. The key slid right in and turned with a solid click. Inside, the first thing I saw was a folded police blanket, the kind you see at crime scenes. On top of it lay a necklace. A simple silver chain with a tiny tarnished ballet slipper charm. My breath just stopped in my chest. I knew that necklace. My younger sister Clara wore it every day. She had it on the day she vanished from the state fair, 40 long years ago. They found her poor body a week later in a drainage ditch. The police never caught who did it. That loss crippled my mother with grief, and I believe it sent my father to an early grave. Seeing that charm again felt like a punch. My fingers trembled as I picked up the necklace, the metal cold against my skin. I set it aside and lifted the blanket. Underneath were photographs, old Polaroids. The images made my stomach turn. They showed women and girls, some barely dressed, all in various states of fear and distress. Their eyes were wide with a terror I could feel right through the decades, right into my own kitchen. The last photo was the one that truly froze my blood. It was Clara, not the sweet school portrait they used in the newspapers. This was a candid shot. She was smiling so big, completely unaware, holding a big pink cloud of cotton candy. The fairground lights were a beautiful blur behind her. Written on the white border in that same precise handwriting, Walter's handwriting, was a date. It was the very day she disappeared. A heavy thump came from directly overhead. Walter was restless, moving around. I had to move fast. The fog in his mind is unpredictable. Sometimes he's like a gentle ghost, and other times he has these flashes of a chilling, sharp clarity that scare me. My heart started hammering against my ribs like a wild bird. I shoved the photographs back under the blanket, placed the necklace on top, and closed the lid. The box clicked shut, just as I heard the slow, shuffling drag of his slippers on the floorboards. He was at the top of the basement stairs. I stayed perfectly still in the dusty dark, listening, afraid to even breathe. I needed to know everything, right then and there. The weight of that metal box in my hands felt like it was the only real thing left in my world. I carried it, now hidden inside my old canvas grocery bag, into our small home office and shut the door softly. Through the doorway, I could see Walter in his recliner in the living room, pacified with a bowl of banana pudding. His eyes were empty and far away again, fixed on the silent television screen. The clock on the wall ticked so loudly it seemed to shake the room, each passing second a hammer strike, reminding me that my whole life, nearly 50 years of it, was a beautiful lie constructed by the man slurping dessert just 10 feet away. I had to see it all. I needed to inventory the hell he'd left for me in that box. I sat at the old oak desk, my hands trembling as I worked the combination. I spread the contents carefully under the harsh, unforgiving glow of the brass lamp. There were 12 photographs. They were of various locations I didn't recognize, with different women in each one. Some were smiling. Some looked confused. There was a small, cloth-bound journal, the dark blue fabric worn at the edges. A driver's license that wasn't his, issued by a state we'd never even visited, with a name I didn't know. And then, resting on top of it all, was Clara's necklace, the little silver locket I'd helped her pick out for her 16th birthday. I touched it, and my heart just broke all over again. That journal was the ledger of a monster. Page after page of initials, dates, and locations. Brief, clinical notes written in Walter's once familiar handwriting. C.A. State Fair. Persistent. Required correction. Correction. The word made my stomach turn over. I knew instantly that was Clara Ann, our daughter. The last entry was dated just over 3 years ago, which was right around the time Walter's real cognitive decline became pronounced, and we started going to doctors. The final set of initials was LM. No location was noted this time. Who was LM? This knowledge didn't just hurt me. It crumbled my entire past into dust. Every supposedly tender memory, every quiet anniversary dinner, every moment I'd felt comforted by his presence was now poisoned and ugly. I looked at my own hands. Then I pictured his. The hands that had held mine at the altar, that had fixed my car on a rainy afternoon, that had so carefully built our daughter's crib in the nursery. Those same hands had done these terrible things. They had taken pictures and written those awful words. How could I ever look at them again? A sudden noise from upstairs shattered the silence. A bowl clattered to the floor. I froze solid in my chair, not even daring to breathe, listening hard. Then I heard his voice, not the mumbled confusion of recent years, but clear and sharp as ice water, call down the hallway. "Martha, are you down there? Are you poking around where you shouldn't be?" The sound of it, so like his old self, sent a cold dread straight through me. The chilling clarity in his voice cut through me like a blade. My heart started to pound. Moving fast, I swept all the awful evidence, the journal, the lock of hair, the little ribbon, back into that dreadful box. I shoved it deep into the desk's bottom drawer, my hands fumbling a bit. I locked it tight with the small key I kept for old tax documents. I pressed my forehead against the cool wood of the desk for just a second, taking one steadying breath, and then another. I had to go to him. I walked to the kitchen, forcing my steps to be normal. Walter stood there amid the disaster, looking so confused and childlike. Shattered ceramic and splattered chocolate pudding were everywhere. "Made a mess," he mumbled, staring at his own feet. "It's okay, Walt. It's just a bowl. Let's get you cleaned up." My own voice sounded steady, which felt like a miracle. I led him gently by the elbow to the kitchen sink. I ran warm water on a cloth. As I wiped his hands, I studied his profile, the face I've loved for over half a century, the same kind eyes, now vacant, the familiar gentle slope of his shoulders. It hit me then, a horrible thought. This gentle confusion, this frailness. Was it all just a disguise? Had the last 50 years been a perfect, loving disguise? I had to know. I had to find out if that name, LM, was someone accounted for. I needed the computer. After I got Walter settled into his recliner with a fresh blanket and turned on his favorite nature program, I hurried back to the office. My fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard. I did a search for missing persons in our region with those initials over the last 5 years. It only took a moment to yield one terrible result. Lisa Mullins, a 22-year-old waitress. She vanished after her shift at a roadside diner called The Crossroads, about 40 miles north of here. The date of her disappearance aligned perfectly with the final, frantic journal entry. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. That diner was right off the highway Walter used for his long-haul trucking routes for decades before he retired. He didn't stop driving because of remorse. He retired because the disease began eroding his meticulous control. He retired to avoid getting caught. Sitting in the quiet office, the reality closed in on me. His unpredictable lucidity was now a constant whispering threat. He was a live wire, sparking dangerously in the very heart of my home. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out, to think, to feel air that wasn't shared with him. I just needed space. I went back to the living room and told him I was going to the pharmacy to pick up his prescription. He seemed to be dozing. As I grabbed my old coat from the hook by the door, I heard the chair creak. He looked up. His gaze was different, sharper, the way it sometimes gets for just a flash. It pinned me in place. "Don't be long, Martha," he said, his tone utterly flat and unlike his usual confused mumble. A chill ran down my spine. "You know I don't like it when you're gone." The drive to the county sheriff's office felt longer than usual. My old sedan hummed along the familiar roads, but everything looked different today. That metal lockbox was right there on the passenger seat floor, a heavy, silent passenger. My plan was simple: walk in, hand it over, and let the law finally catch up to the man I married. After 40 years of him evading it, this would be the end. I pulled into the parking lot, found a spot away from the door, and turned off the engine. I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I couldn't make myself move. My mind raced with what would happen next. The scandal would be immediate and ugly. Our daughter, Sarah, and our sweet grandkids would learn the truth. They'd see newspaper headlines or hear whispers that their grandfather was a monster. And they'd learn that I, their grandma, lived with him, loved him, and never had a clue. The shame of that felt like a weight on my chest, a second burial just for me. Then I thought about Walter's mind, all fogged up with dementia. Would he even be competent to stand trial? The lawyers and doctors would argue. Most likely he'd end his days in some secured medical facility, not a prison cell. Where was the justice in that? It felt hollow, like a punishment that wouldn't fit the crime or give peace to those girls' families. The real worry, the one that made my blood run cold, was his ticking clock of a mind. What if he had one of those rare, clear moments? Would he remember the box in the rafters? Would he look at me and suspect that I knew his secret? The fear of that moment kept me frozen in my car. I just couldn't do it. Not today. Maybe not ever. I started the car back up and drove away from the sheriff's office, heading instead to the town library. I needed to know more. The library was quiet, with that old book smell. I signed in to use a public computer in the corner, my fingers clumsy on the keyboard. I searched for Lisa Mullen's case. There wasn't much to find, just a few faded news articles from decades ago and a sad plea from her family printed in the local paper. No body was ever found. It sent a chill through me. It was just like Clara's case, at least in the beginning. A pattern. He kept his terrible souvenirs, but he hid the bodies so well. Sitting there in the fluorescent light, I felt a deep, aching sadness for these lost girls and their families. When I finally returned home, the house felt wrong. It was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears. Walter wasn't in his usual chair by the window. The blanket was neatly folded, but he was gone. A cold dread, like icy water, poured down my spine. I walked slowly down the hall, my heart pounding. I found him in the office. He was standing perfectly still in front of the old desk, right where that locked drawer was. He was just staring at it, his posture stiff. He didn't turn around when I entered the room. The air felt thick. "This lock is new," he stated, his back still to me. His voice was flat, not confused like it often was these days. It wasn't a question. It was a simple, cold observation that made my breath catch in my throat. "The old one was broken," I heard myself say, and the lie came out smooth and automatic, a skill I never thought I'd need. "I had it replaced last week, for the tax papers, you know how it is." I moved to the window, fussing with the blind to let in a different light, putting some good physical space between us and that desk drawer. He turned slowly, so slowly. His face was a perfect mask of benign confusion, the kind he wore when he pretended not to hear me. But his eyes were busy, assessing the whole room, the clutter on the desk, and finally, me. "You've been busy," he stated, his voice flat. "Just the usual puttering," I said, forcing a smile that felt tight on my face. My heart was knocking against my ribs. "How about I put the kettle on? We could both use some tea." He ignored the offer completely. His gaze drifted back to that drawer as if pulled by a magnet. "You never were a good liar, Martha. It's one of the things I always loved about you." The words were almost sweet, but they froze my blood. He took a shuffling, careful step toward the desk. Right then, I knew it was about pure survival. I had to redirect him, to break this terrifying, quiet focus. It meant embracing the performance fully, becoming the doting, oblivious wife one more time. I could play that part in my sleep. "Walter," I said, making my voice soften with a concern I didn't have to fake. "You're looking awfully pale. Are you feeling faint? Let's go sit down, dear." I moved to him, taking his arm gently. For one awful second, he resisted, his muscle tense and strong under my hand. Then, just like that, the familiar facade of infirmity returned, and he allowed me to lead him out of the room, leaning on me heavily with each step. I got him settled in his living room chair, my mind racing a mile a minute. That lock on the desk was just a flimsy interior thing. If he truly wanted in, he could break it with one good yank. I needed a decoy, something to satisfy his curiosity. After making his tea just the way he liked it, I excused myself. "I'll be right back," I chirped. "I think I left my good sewing kit in the garage, and I need to mend that pillow." In the cool, dusty garage, my hands shook as I looked. I found it. An old, empty strongbox of a similar weight and size. I filled it with random papers, old receipts, a broken watch, some heavy bolts, anything to give it heft and a satisfying rattle. I brought it inside, and loudly enough for him to hear, I locked it in the hall closet with a dramatic sigh of relief. "Finally found that old box of your father's things," I called out toward the living room. "Been looking for it for ages. It was buried under all those old paint cans." From his chair, Walter watched me, silently sipping his tea. He gave me a slow, faint nod of acknowledgement. But as I turned away to go to the kitchen, I caught his reflection in the dark, blank television screen. He wasn't looking at the closet door at all. His eyes were fixed right on my retreating back, still watching, always watching. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old house felt like a footstep, every sigh of the wind like a breath at the door. I lay stiff beside him, listening to the ragged rhythm of his snoring, and stared at the ceiling. The decoy box in the closet was a temporary fix, a band-aid on a gushing wound. He was testing me. That look in his reflection, it was a hunter's look. I needed to move the real evidence somewhere he would never think to look, a place that belonged solely to me. By first light, I had my plan. I waited until his breathing deepened into a true sleep. Then I slipped from the bed like a ghost. The real lockbox came out of the desk drawer. It felt heavier than ever, dense with evil. I carried it, not to the garage or the attic, but to my gardening shed at the very back of the yard. It was my sanctuary, filled with the smell of peat moss and fertilizer, tools hanging in neat rows. Walter never set foot in here. He said the dirt bothered him. I went to the far corner, to the large, heavy pot where I overwintered my lemon tree. With effort, I tipped the tree out, its roots a tangled mass. I dug down into the fresh potting soil with my hands until I hit the bottom of the ceramic pot. I placed the lockbox there, covered it with a layer of soil, and carefully replanted the tree. My hands were filthy, caked with dark earth. It felt right. I was rinsing my hands at the outdoor spigot when I heard the back door open. Walter stood on the step, silhouetted against the yellow kitchen light. He was fully dressed, which was unusual for him these early hours. "You're up early?" he called, his voice carrying across the dew-wet grass. "The roses needed tending," I called back, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "Black spot." He shuffled down the 2 steps and onto the lawn, moving toward me with an intent that made my skin prickle. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes not on me, but on the shed door, which I'd left ajar. "You spend a lot of time out here lately," he observed. It wasn't an accusation. It was worse. It was data collection. "It's peaceful," I said, drying my hands on my apron. He nodded slowly, then his gaze swung to me, sharp and clear. "You always did have clever hands, Martha. Resourceful." He reached out then, not toward me, but toward the spigot. He turned the handle, cutting off the water. The gesture was oddly possessive, a reclaiming of territory. "Don't catch a chill." He turned and shuffled back inside, leaving me standing there in the cool morning air, the scent of damp earth and roses suddenly feeling like the smell of a grave. The library computer had given me a name, but I needed a face. I needed to see Lisa Mullins, to make her real. Later that day, under the guise of needing fancy yarn for a new knitting project, I drove to the neighboring county where she had vanished. The Crossroads Diner was still there, a low, long building with a faded sign. My heart hammered as I pushed the door open, a bell jingling overhead. It was all vinyl seats and the smell of old grease. I took a booth by the window, my hands trembling slightly as I picked up a sticky menu. A different, older waitress brought me coffee. Her name tag said Dolores. I made small talk about the weather, then carefully steered the conversation. "I think I knew a girl who worked here years back," I said, my voice casual. "Lisa? Pretty thing?" Dolores's face closed up like a fist. She wiped the table with a hard swipe of her rag. "Don't talk about Lisa," she said, her voice low. "That's a sore subject around here. Poor kid. We all loved her." She looked at me, really looked, her eyes narrowing. "You a reporter or something? Because we're tired of that." "No," I said quickly, feeling exposed. "Just an old woman with a bad memory. Thought it might be her." I ordered a slice of pie I didn't want and ate it slowly, watching the parking lot. I saw the ghost of a young woman carrying trays, laughing with truckers. I saw Walter's rig, maybe parked right out there in spot number 8, him coming in for a coffee and a slice of pie, just like me. He would have been polite, charming. He always knew how to get people to trust him. When Dolores brought my check, a folded piece of paper was tucked underneath it. I waited until she walked away. I unfolded it. It was a photocopy of a missing person flyer from decades ago. Lisa Mullins smiled out at me, her hair in a side ponytail, her eyes bright. Written in pen in the margin, in a shaky hand, were the words, "Her mama still lives at 421 Pinecrest. She waits." I left a large tip, my fingers cold. Driving to Pinecrest Lane felt like driving into a past I was now part of. The house was small, well kept, with flower boxes. An elderly woman was on her knees in the front garden, weeding. I pulled over a block away and just watched. I couldn't get out. What would I say? "I think my husband killed your daughter." The words were monstrous. I saw her pat the earth around a plant, a gesture so gentle and full of care. She had lived with this unknown for longer than I'd known my secret. The weight of our shared, hidden truth pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I started the car and drove away, a coward. I had come for a face, and I'd found a living heartache that mirrored my own. I wasn't ready to connect them. Confronting Lisa's mother was beyond me, but the flyer with its handwritten note was a spark. Someone else remembered. Someone else cared. Dolores, the waitress, had taken a risk giving that to me. It meant the case wasn't entirely cold in the hearts of those who knew her. I needed to know if there were others. That night, after Walter was asleep, I went back to the library computer search, but this time I looked for patterns, not just names. I mapped the dates from Walter's journal against his old trucking logs, which I still had filed away in the garage. The correlation was chilling. Every entry matched a time he was on the road, often near small towns with fairs, bus stations, or roadside stops. Then I found her. Another one. The journal entry was brief. PR, bus depot, compliant. The date was from about 7 years before Clara. My blood ran cold. I searched missing persons databases with those initials and that time frame. Paula Reyes. She was 19, last seen at a Greyhound station in a town about 200 miles from here. I printed out the little information I could find. A grainy photo from a college ID, a paragraph describing her. I now had 3 names: Clara, Lisa, Paula, 3 girls whose lives were erased. And I was living with the man who did it. The evidence was in a flower pot in my shed, but it felt useless. It was just a box of horrors, not proof a prosecutor could use without a body, without a witness. Walter's mind was the only living witness, and it was crumbling by the day. I had to make him show me. I had to trigger a lucid moment and steer it toward the truth. It was a dangerous, desperate idea. The next morning, I decided to test the edges of his memory. I made his favorite breakfast, pancakes with blueberry syrup. As I set the plate before him, I spoke softly. "It's a beautiful morning. Reminds me of that summer we went to the state fair all the time. You remember that?" He stared at his plate, fork in hand. No reaction. "Clara loved that fair," I pressed on, my voice barely above a whisper. I watched his hands. The fork stopped moving. His knuckles whitened just a fraction. "Who?" he mumbled, not looking up. "Clara, my sister." He was silent for a long moment. Then he looked up, and his eyes were clear and focused, and utterly empty of the confusion I'd grown used to. "You shouldn't talk about things you don't understand, Martha," he said, his voice quiet and perfectly even. "Some doors are best left closed." He went back to eating his pancakes, cutting them into precise, even squares. The conversation was over. The door had been shut in my face, and the lock had turned with a final, terrifying click. His warning was a line drawn in the sand. I had crossed it, and he had shown me the steel beneath the fog. I spent the day in a state of high-alert normalcy, folding laundry, watching game shows with him, my every nerve screaming. The domestic routine was now a minefield. That evening, as I was clearing the dinner dishes, the phone rang. It was our daughter, Sarah. Her cheerful voice was a lifeline from another world. "Hi, Mum. Just checking in? How's Dad?" "He's about the same, honey," I said, turning my back to the living room where Walter sat. "Quiet day. Listen, the kids have a teacher work day next Friday. I was thinking of driving up for a quick visit, just an overnight. I can help you with some things around the house." My blood turned to ice. Sarah. Here. With the children. In this house. With him. The image of her bright, smiling boy and girl running through these halls, maybe even going out to the gardening shed, filled me with a panic so pure it stole my breath. "Oh, sweetie, that's not a good time," I said too quickly. I think your father is coming down with a little bug. Very contagious. Let's wait a few weeks." There was a pause on the line. "A bug? Mum? You sound strange. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, just tired. It's a bad time." I could feel Walter's presence behind me, a silent pressure. "Okay," Sarah said, her voice now laced with concern. "Well, call me if you need anything. Love you." "Love you too." I hung up, my hand slick on the receiver. When I turned, Walter was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. He hadn't been there a moment before. How much had he heard? His expression was unreadable. "Sarah?" he asked. "Yes, just checking in." He nodded slowly. "Good. Good girl. She shouldn't come here." He said it not as a request, but as a statement of fact. Then he added, looking right through me, "It's not safe for visitors." The words hung in the air, thick and menacing. Was he threatening her? Or was he, in his twisted way, warning me? The ambiguity was its own kind of torture. He turned and shuffled back to his chair, leaving me alone in the brightly lit kitchen. I looked at the block of knives on the counter. I looked at the back door. I looked at the phone. Every ordinary object had transformed into either a weapon or an escape route. My own home was no longer a sanctuary. It was the arena where our silent war was playing out. And he had just deepened the threat by bringing my daughter into it. That unsafe for visitors comment bothered me all night. It wasn't a warning. It felt like he was marking his territory. This was his ground. I couldn't let Sarah walk into it. And I couldn't stand having that box in my flower pot anymore. It was a poison. It needed to go to someone who could use it. But I still didn't trust the police not to make things worse for my family. There was one other person. Lisa Mullins's mother. She deserved the truth. She had waited long enough. 2 days later, I told Walter I had a doctor's appointment. It was the first time I'd left him alone since finding the box. It was a big risk. I drove back to Pinecrest Lane, the lockbox, wrapped in a blanket, on the seat beside me. My palms were sweaty. This time, I pulled right into the driveway of 421 Pinecrest. The same older woman was in the garden. She stood up slowly, watching me with wary eyes. "Mrs. Mullins?" My voice was shaky. "Yes. My name is Martha. I have some information about Lisa." Her face changed. Wariness turned to fear and a desperate hope. "You'd better come inside." Her living room was a shrine to Lisa. Photos covered every surface. The air felt heavy. I couldn't sit. I held out the wrapped bundle. "I found this. I think it belonged to the man who took her." I still couldn't say, "my husband." She took it with trembling hands. She unwrapped the blanket and stared at the tarnished box. She didn't open it. Her eyes filled with tears. "Who?" she whispered. I opened my mouth to tell her everything. But then I saw a photograph on the mantel. It was Lisa with another girl, laughing, arms around each other. The other girl was Paula Reyes, from the bus depot. "Who is that with Lisa?" I asked, pointing. Mrs. Mullins looked. That's Paula, Lisa's best friend. They vanished about a year apart. We always thought maybe the same person. Her voice faded. A horrible understanding dawned on her face as she looked from the photo to the box to my face. I never got to say another word. My phone vibrated. It was the alert from the home system I'd secretly installed. The live feed showed Walter standing in our living room. He was perfectly still, staring right up at the camera I'd hidden. He knew. Then he turned and walked toward the back of the house, toward the gardening shed. He was holding the long pry bar from the garage. The screen went dark as he moved out of sight. He was going for the flower pot. He was going to find it empty. I drove home like a madwoman, my heart hammering against my ribs. The image of Walter with that pry bar was burned into my mind. He wasn't confused. He was hunting. I skidded into the driveway, not even bothering to park straight, and ran for the backyard. The door to my gardening shed was swinging open, banging softly against the frame in the breeze. Inside, it was a scene of quiet destruction. The heavy ceramic pot lay on its side, shattered. Dirt and the roots of my lemon tree were spilled across the floor. The space where the lockbox had been was just a hollow in the soil. He was gone. The pry bar was discarded on the workbench. I stood there, breathing in the smell of damp earth and broken pottery, feeling a cold terror settle in my bones. He knew it was gone. He knew I had taken it. The fragile performance of our last 50 years was over. I walked back to the house on unsteady legs. The kitchen was empty. The living room was empty. A profound, whispering silence filled the place. I found him in our bedroom. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing his outdoor shoes, which were caked with dirt from the shed. He was holding something in his hands, turning it over slowly. It was a small, framed photograph of us on our wedding day, young and smiling. He didn't look up when I entered. "It's gone," he said, his voice calm, conversational. I said nothing. I just stood in the doorway, my back to the hall, ready to run. "You took it," he continued. "Where is it, Martha?" "I destroyed it," I lied, my voice thin. At that, he finally looked up. His eyes were clear and terribly sane. "No, you didn't. You're not a destroyer. You're a keeper, a preserver, like me." He set the wedding photo down carefully on the nightstand. "You gave it to someone." "Who?" The directness of the question shocked me. "The police," I said, trying to sound firm. A faint, almost sad smile touched his lips. "If you had, they'd be here by now. So it's someone else. Someone you think deserves to know." He stood up slowly, and I took a step back. He didn't approach me. He went to the window and looked out at the yard. "It doesn't matter. It's just things. The important parts. I always kept those right here." He tapped the side of his head with a finger. Then he turned back to me, and his expression shifted into one of paternal disappointment. "You've upset the routine, Martha. Now we have to make a new one." The new routine was my prison. Walter's lucidity never faded. Instead, it hardened into a quiet, watchful control that filled the whole house. He became my silent shadow, following me from room to room without a word. If I went to the kitchen to make tea, he'd pull out a chair and sit at the table, just watching. If I moved to the living room to try and read, he'd settle into his own chair, his presence a constant, heavy pressure that made it hard to breathe. He never shouted or threatened me outright. He just occupied every space. The phone rang once in the late afternoon, a sharp sound that made me jump. He was on his feet and had it in his hand before I could take 2 steps. It was just a telemarketer. He listened, said a calm, "No thank you," and hung up. Then he turned and looked right at me. "We don't need any interruptions," he stated. I knew exactly what he meant. I understood his game. He was waiting for me to break, to make a run for it, or to call for help. He was herding me without ever lifting a hand. That night, after a silent dinner, he didn't go to his usual recliner. He announced he was tired and went to bed early. I stayed up, pretending to clean an already spotless kitchen, my mind racing over the same desperate track. I had to get a message out. I had to warn Sarah not to come this weekend under any circumstances. I remembered my old address book was in the desk drawer in the office. I waited a full hour, listening to the quiet house, before I dared to creep down the hall. His bedroom door was open a crack. From inside, I could hear the steady, even rhythm of his breathing. Too even, I thought. It sounded like fake sleep. In the office, I shut the door softly and opened the address book with fumbling fingers. Sarah's number was right there. I didn't dare use the phone. I found a small blank note card and a pen. My hand shook so badly the writing was a messy scrawl. "Sarah, do not visit. Not safe. Dad is not well. Trust me. Destroy this note after you read it. Love, Mom." I read it twice, folded it into a tiny square, and slipped it deep into the pocket of my housecoat. My plan was simple. I would mail it first thing in the morning. I just needed a stamp from the kitchen drawer. As I turned away from the desk, a floorboard let out a loud creak right behind me. My heart leapt into my throat. Walter stood in the doorway, his broad silhouette filling the space. He was holding a glass of water, looking perfectly calm. "Can't sleep?" he asked. His voice was flat, devoid of any real curiosity. "Just getting a notepad," I mumbled, gesturing weakly toward the desk. "For a list." He nodded slowly, his eyes moving over the scene, the open address book, the pen lying right beside it. "Writing to someone?" he inquired, his tone deceptively mild. "Just a grocery list for tomorrow," I said. The lie felt bitter and thick in my mouth, like I'd swallowed ash. He took a slow, deliberate sip of water, his eyes locking onto mine over the rim of the glass. They were so cold. "Good," he said. "We're low on milk." He then stepped aside, just enough for me to squeeze past him in the narrow doorway. "Come back to bed, Martha. You need your rest." It wasn't an invitation. It was a clear instruction. I walked past him, feeling the tiny, folded paper in my pocket, burning like a live coal against my leg. He fell in step right behind me, his quiet, relentless footsteps, a perfect echo of my own, all the way down the dark hall. The next morning, I could still feel the folded note in my robe pocket. Mailing it was completely impossible with Walter shadowing my every step. I needed a different path entirely. While he was in the bathroom, I had to act fast. I hurried to the hall closet and pushed aside the hanging clothes to reach my old winter coat tucked in the back. My fingers fumbled as I slipped the note deep into the inner pocket, behind the worn satin lining. It was only a temporary hiding place, but at least it was away from my body. That's when a new, desperate idea took shape. If I couldn't get word out to the world, I had to bring proof in. I needed someone from the outside to see him as he really was, not just as a confused old man I was humoring. Later, during his afternoon doze in the living room recliner, I made my move. I remembered his old cell phone, a simple blue flip phone he hadn't touched in years. I quietly opened the kitchen junk drawer and found it buried under coupons and pens. My heart was pounding as I carried it to the downstairs powder room and locked the door. My hands were so slick with sweat, I almost dropped it. I pried the phone open. The screen was dark. The battery was long dead, of course. But I could see the tiny SIM card still inside its slot. If I could just get it to a phone store, maybe someone could pull the data. His contacts, his call history from around the time Lisa Mullins vanished. It was a desperate long shot, but it was something tangible, a piece of the past he couldn't explain away. Suddenly, I heard the familiar creak of his recliner from the living room. He was awake. Panicking, I shoved the phone and its loose back cover into the little decorative wicker basket, burying it under a stack of fancy guest towels. I flushed the toilet for show and ran the water in the sink, trying to calm my breathing. When I came out, he was already standing in the hall, waiting for me. "Everything all right in there?" he asked, his eyes drifting to the closed bathroom door behind me. "Just fine," I said, my voice too light. "Just a little headache coming on." He reached out then, and I couldn't help it. I flinched. But he didn't touch me. His hand went past my shoulder to the thermostat on the wall. "It's gotten chilly in here," he murmured, clicking the heat up a few degrees. The gesture was one of false care, a quiet reminder that he controlled the very air I breathed. He was the keeper, and I had become a specimen in his collection, to be maintained and observed under his watch. That evening, as I was drying the last supper plate, the doorbell rang. The sound was so foreign, so utterly shocking in the silence of this house, that I jumped and the plate slipped from my hand. It hit the kitchen floor and shattered into pieces. Walter was out of his chair in an instant, his usual slow movements gone, replaced by a fluid and terrifying alertness. He put a stern finger to his lips, commanding my silence. He crept to the front window and peered through the narrow sidelight curtain. His whole body went rigid. He turned to me, his face a mask of cold fury. "You didn't," he whispered, the words a venomous hiss that filled the quiet room. "What did you do?" I hadn't done anything. The terror on his face was real. He wasn't performing for me. Whoever was at the door was an unexpected threat to him. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me away from the foyer, down the hall toward the bedroom. "Not a sound," he commanded, shoving me into the room. "Stay here." He closed the door. I heard the distinct, soft click of the old lock engaging from the outside. He had locked me in. I rushed to the window. A plain sedan was parked at the curb. A woman was walking back to it. It was Dolores, the waitress from the Crossroads diner. She must have followed me home days ago, gotten my address. She was leaving a flyer or a note on the porch. She wasn't police. She was just a concerned stranger. But to Walter, she was a breach in his perimeter. His reaction was one of pure predatory panic. I heard the front door open. His voice, friendly and confused, the perfect act, floated down the hall. "Hello? Can I help you?" I couldn't hear Dolores's reply. Then Walter's voice again. "Oh, my wife isn't feeling well. I'll give that to her. Thank you for your concern." The door closed. A moment later, the lock on my door turned. He opened it. He was holding a folded piece of paper. His expression was calm again, but his eyes were chips of flint. He held the paper out to me. It was another missing person flyer for Lisa Mullins. On it, Dolores had written, "Call me if you remember anything, any detail, please." And a phone number. Walter watched me read it. "A very dedicated waitress," he said softly. "It's a shame. Some people can't let the past rest." He took the flyer back from my numb fingers. He carefully, deliberately tore it in half, then into quarters, and let the pieces flutter into the bedroom wastebasket. "It's better this way, Martha. For everyone. Now," he said, brushing his hands together. "We have a mess to clean up in the kitchen. You broke a plate." He led me back to the kitchen, his hand on the small of my back, a parody of a guiding touch. I cleaned up the shattered ceramic, sweeping the pieces into the dustpan. As I dumped them into the trash, I saw the torn flyer on top. He had made his point perfectly. He could intercept any outside contact. He could shred any hope. I was completely alone. And he had just shown me that his fear of exposure was the only lever I had left, but I had no strength left to pull it. The broken plate was a symbol. My world was in pieces, and he was making me clean it up. That night, I lay beside him, wide awake, staring at the dark. The locked door, the torn flyer, the stolen phone in the bathroom basket. They were all failed moves in a game I was losing. I needed a different strategy. I couldn't outmuscle him. I couldn't outrun him. But I could outremember him. His mind was a vault, but the dementia was the crack in the door. I had to use his own sickness against him. The next day, I began a new performance. I stopped showing fear. I stopped trying to hide my knowledge. Instead, I leaned into the role of the weary, slightly irritated caretaker, but I salted our routine with specific, painful echoes. While making his oatmeal, I'd hum the tune to Blue Suede Shoes, the song that was playing on the radio the day Clara disappeared. He'd freeze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. I'd pretend not to notice. I found an old map in the garage. I spread it on the kitchen table, telling him I was planning a pretend road trip. I circled towns with a red pen. Parksville, where Paula Reyes vanished from the bus depot. Millerton, near where Lisa Mullins worked. I left the pen right on the map, the red circles glaring. He walked by the table, looked down, and his face went pale and waxy. He didn't say a word. He just picked up the map, folded it slowly, and put it in the trash. But his hand was shaking. It was working. The clear, controlled lucidity was becoming agitated, fractured. He'd mutter to himself in the other room, short, sharp sentences I couldn't catch. He'd look at me with a mixture of suspicion and a strange, creeping fear, as if I were becoming a ghost from his own past. My final test came after dinner. I was washing dishes. He was drying. The silence was thick. I picked up a large, sharp carving knife to wash it. I held it up, watching the light glint on the blade. "This needs a good sharpen," I said, my voice casual. "It's so dull it can barely cut through anything anymore, not like the old ones." I turned and looked right at him. "You used to keep your knives so sharp, Walter. Remember?" He dropped the plate he was holding. It hit the linoleum with a crash, but didn't break. He stared at me, his eyes wide, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The facade crumbled completely, revealing raw, undiluted terror beneath. He didn't see his wife. He saw an accuser. He saw his own reckoning. He backed away from me, from the knife in my hand, until he hit the counter. You stop that," he stammered, his voice high and thin. "You put that down." For the first time since I found the box, I saw true, unmistakable fear in his eyes. And I knew, in that moment, I could use it. His fear was my oxygen. I washed the knife, watching the soap suds slide off the blade, then placed it in the drying rack. I didn't look at him again. I finished the dishes, wiped the counters, and went to the living room. I felt him hovering in the kitchen doorway, watching me like a scared animal. I turned on the TV to a news channel. A reporter was talking about a cold case review in a nearby county. I left it on, volume just loud enough to hear. I sat in my armchair, the one opposite his, and waited. I picked up my knitting, a simple scarf, and made my hands move. Click, click, click. The needles made a calm rhythm against the news and his ragged breathing. After 10 minutes, he shuffled in. He didn't sit. He stood by the fireplace, his hands clenching. The news mentioned familial DNA solving old crimes. Walter flinched. They can find you through family now, I said, not looking up. My voice was casual. Did you know? They take DNA from a crime scene and find a relative. It leads them right to you. I paused. Sarah sent ancestry kits for the kids last Christmas for a school project. I thought it was nice. His breath caught. I looked at him. His face was pale, eyes darting. His disease and his terror were at war. You're lying, he whispered. But it was weak. I set my knitting down. I stood and went to the bookshelf. I pulled out our family Bible. I carried it to him and held it out. It's all here, Walter. The births, marriages, family tree, all the connections. It's a map to you. I didn't smile. I just watched. He stared at the Bible like it was a snake. He wouldn't take it. He backed away, shaking his head. No, you're trying to confuse me. You're tricking me. Am I? I asked softly. I opened the Bible to the family pages. I pointed to Sarah's name, then the grandchildren's. There they are. Your blood. Their DNA is in a database in California, waiting to be matched. I met his horrified gaze. The past isn't buried, Walter. It's alive, in their blood. A choked sound escaped him. He turned and stumbled out. I heard him fumble with the back door lock, then it opened and slammed. He had fled into the yard. I closed the Bible, my hands steady. The weapon wasn't a knife. It was the future he tried to erase, and I had just handed it to him. I didn't follow him. I gave him the dark and the cold. From the kitchen window, I watched his silhouette, a hunched shape on the lawn, staring at the gardening shed. He was out there a long time in the biting autumn night. Finally, he moved to the old tool shed at the back and went inside. His terror had driven him there. I put on my heavy coat and took the flashlight. I didn't turn on the yard light. I walked across the crunchy grass, my beam cutting through the blackness. The shed door was ajar. I pushed it open. It smelled of rust and damp rot. He was in the corner, on his knees, scraping at the dirt floor with bare hands. He'd pulled up floorboards. His fingers were bleeding, caked with soil. He muttered, "No, not here." "What are you looking for, Walter?" I asked calmly, shining the light on him. He jerked up, face smeared with dirt, eyes wild. "She's not here. I put her here," he wailed. He was arguing with his failing memory. "Who isn't here?" I pressed. The hole held only rocks and roots. "The girl from the fair." His voice cracked. He cried, tears cutting through grime. I had to keep her safe. But they keep moving. You moved them. Then, he wasn't a monster. He was a shattered old man, destroyed by guilt his mind couldn't hold. Dementia had turned his secrets into ghosts. He'd come looking for Clara, or Lisa, or Paula, sure their bodies were here, but he'd hidden them so well even he couldn't find them. I saw my chance. I lowered the light. "The police are coming," I said evenly. "They're bringing dogs. They'll find all the girls because I told them where." It was a brutal lie. He froze. His head drooped. All fight left him. He knelt, sobbing, mumbling, "I'm sorry, Martha." I didn't know who he apologized to. I turned and walked back. I left him in the dark and cold. Inside, I locked the door and called the ambulance. I said my husband with advanced dementia had wandered out, was hurt and confused. Then I called Sarah. Her voice was sleepy. I said, "Honey, it's time. Your father needs more help. He's had a very bad night. Can you come in the morning?" She sighed with relief and said she'd be on the road by dawn. They took him away on a gurney, wrapped up and silent. He'd stopped crying and talking, just retreated somewhere deep inside. The paramedics were gentle. I gave them the practiced answers about his dementia and his fall. I signed the forms. I watched the ambulance lights vanish, and then a new, empty quiet filled the house. The next morning, I went to the tool shed with a shovel. I avoided the hole he'd dug. I went to a clean spot of dirt floor and started digging. It didn't take long to find it. A large black plastic tarp, wrapped around something heavy and tied with cord. I didn't open it. I covered it back up, smoothed the dirt, and went inside to call the sheriff. I told them I'd found what looked like human remains while cleaning out the shed. My voice was flat. I gave them the address. Sarah arrived with the first police car. I met her on the porch, hugged her tight, and held her while she cried. I told her the story I would stick to. I said I'd found some disturbing old things that made me think her father knew about some terrible crimes. His dementia made him paranoid. He'd been digging and talking nonsense, so I'd called for help. Now, while cleaning, I'd found this. I said I was so sorry. She believed me. She had to. The investigation was a blur. The remains were Lisa Mullins. Walter's journal, which I'd given to her mother, led them to other sites. They found Paula Reyes. They never found Clara. Walter was declared unfit for trial and sent to a secure psychiatric facility. He never spoke a clear word again. The doctors said his mind had fully collapsed. A month later, I was in my gardening shed. I'd repotted the lemon tree. The morning sun was warm. I took my trowel to prepare a bed for winter bulbs. The soil was rich and dark. I worked it with my hands, feeling its cool, grainy promise. It was just dirt, just a garden. I planted the bulbs, covered them, and patted the earth smooth. Sarah visits often now with the kids. They play in the yard. They know their grandfather is very sick, in a hospital far away. I sometimes sit on the porch with tea and watch them. The silence in the house is mine now. It is not waiting. It is just quiet. I tend my garden. I remember my sister as she was, not as he made her. On the good days, when the sun is just right, the quiet feels like peace. It's hard-won and fragile, but it's mine.